Well, hey there, howdy hey folks. Coming up shortly, I will begin to do more tutorials on this channel, but before I did any of those, I wanted to go over some of the basic materials you need for oil painting, so that is what this video is about. So, sit on back, relax, and I hope you enjoy this display of education. The number one thing you're going to need for working with oils when you're getting all set up in your studio is a palette. I am using a converted picture frame. My main suggestion is to get it nice and flat. It's nice if you're working on glass too, and the reason for that is it is easier to clean off the paint when you're done, and it is easier to mix things on there. It's nice to have some space to work on because you don't want to just mix a few colors, you want to mix a ton of colors. Number two is our palette knife. If you need to make a big painting, like, it doesn't look like anything right now, but I'll show you a big painting I'm working on. Big painting! So as I work on this huge painting, I'm gonna have areas that have the exact same color, and I'm gonna need to fill those in similarly. So if I use a palette knife, I can go ahead and scoop up lots of paint and mix up the exact color I want so that I have a big puddle of paint that I can use, and I'm not just gonna run out or have to remake the color, and the palette knife really helps with that because I'm scooping the paint, blobbing it on there, and mixing it up in large quantities. Look how much paint we ended up with the mixed by a paintbrush versus how much we ended up with the palette knife. And it didn't all get stuck in the paintbrush, so there's a lot more paint. Another reason you're going to want to use a palette knife, oil is really hard to get out of your paintbrushes. If you mix with your paintbrush, that means you're going to be scrubbing your paintbrush into your paint, and it's going to start to build up in the base of this paintbrush where these bristles meet your actual silver part. But it builds up down here, which means that as that dries, it gets thicker down here and you have less movable bristles. So if you look at this paintbrush, the bristles bend and move really nicely and they're still super soft. If you look at this paintbrush, I can't really move them at all. I can just move like a tiny bit at the very top. But this part is all solid from paint getting caked back in there. And if you're mixing on your palette with a paintbrush, that's just gonna happen a lot faster. Oil paintbrushes, if you buy the nice ones, are actually quite expensive. So take care of your brushes and use a palette knife. Use a palette knife. The last reason you should use a palette knife for mixing is because it keeps your paints clean. Otherwise you have to wash out your paintbrush in between getting each new color and drying it over. So the kinds of brands of paint that I have vary. Grumbacher is a really nice brand of paint, and the other brand that's really nice is Winsor Newton. When you go about buying your oil paint, there's different grades of paint you can get. I like to stick with artist paint, or artist grade paint. You have, with the more expensive paints, more pigment in them and less oil. Pigment is what gives your paint the rich color that it has. So the more pigment you have, the deeper your tones are going to be, the more vibrant and bright your colors are going to be. If you have a higher ratio of oil, then it's just going to be diluted. Now, as far as colors, these are kind of the color suggestions I got when I went through university. So first of all, I have a big tube of titanium white. I go through white the fastest, so I always make sure I keep a big tube of it. Let's go into our warm colors. These are where all my cadmiums are. So I have cadmium red, cadmium orange, and cadmium yellow. Now let's talk about our cool colors. I have a phthalo yellow green, and then I also have a phthalo blue. This phthalo blue is slightly more of a green tone to this other blue that I use, which is French Ultramarine blue, which has a little bit more of a purpley tone. And then I use sap green. I don't usually use a black in my paintings, but if I need to deepen my colors, I use a Paynes gray. Last of all, I have a Quinacridone. It's hard to say. Quinacridone Magenta. This is what I use to get more of my hot pink colors. For darkening things, I also have burnt umber in my hand. Medium. There's someone joining us. This is my cat Todd. I got him in a cardboard box outside the mall in high school. Yes, thank you. The reason oil paint is different from acrylics or watercolor is that it will not mix with water. So when you use acrylic, you use water to make it smoother or flow better or thinner. You can't do that with oil paint. Instead of mixing water with your oil paints, you're gonna use a medium. I love Liquin, and I always say that on this channel. If you just read the front of this, it says speeds drying and improves gloss. Oil paints take a really long time to dry, so you want something that's gonna help it dry a little quicker so you can keep adding to it, adding layers. The last thing that I really love that it does though is it improves the viscosity or the thickness of your paint. Sometimes your paint, when it comes out of the tube, is just too thick and it's hard to get your brush to move the way you want it, especially with the way I paint. I paint super thin layers, and so I want some paint that's gonna glide really easy, be super smooth. So I like to add this to my paint. Makes it dry quicker, more glossy, move more smoothly. The next tool you're gonna need when you are working on an oil painting is a surface to paint on. I like to use MDF board, which is a particle board that you can purchase and have cut down from Home Depot, but obviously there's lots of surfaces you can paint on. When you do choose to work on these boards, do not paint directly on the board. Well, first you need to put on a layer of white acrylic or gesso, so that way you seal the board and the oils from your oil paint aren't gonna seep into the board and ruin it. Because what particle board is basically just like chewed up wood, all glued and squished and compressed together. Oil paint, that is gonna seep into all those little crevices, so make sure you use this. The next thing you're gonna need for painting is a rag. Another visitor. So you're gonna use your paper towel for quick color transitions when you need to wipe down your brush, or if you have too much paint on there, if it's too wet, you need to dry it out, whatever it is. Really good to have these around. Oil brushes can get quite expensive, but I just use really cheap ones, and I don't even use oil brushes. I use acrylic and watercolor brushes. Usually I'll get about 6 paintbrushes for like $4.50, $5. I like how acrylic and watercolor paintbrush bristles are so soft, and because I do paint such thin layers, that really helps me with gliding the paint on there. They're just so nice. I think it's good to have a variety of sizes and a variety of types. I love angled paintbrushes. The other kind of paintbrush that I love is a good pointed round brush. They come to a nice point. I do have a flat brush right here. And if you happen to get the really cheap ones like I do, then it's not that big of a deal to get a good variety of them too. Next thing we have is a razor. The reason you're gonna need one of these for oil paint is to clean off your palette. All you have to do to clean it is to rub your razor over the surface and kind of scratch away the dried on paint, and then you're gonna have a clean surface to work on. Carefully. And I really suggest that you have some kind of tool holding it so that you don't have to hold onto the actual razor blade. You can hold onto this. It gives you better leverage, and it's just safer in general too. So normally when you're working with watercolor or acrylic, you're gonna have a cup of water out next to you to wash out your brush periodically. With oil paints, it's not gonna work that way, so you need a solvent. This is what we used in college. It's odorless mineral spirits. It's a paint thinner, but it is odorless. It still does have a scent to it for sure, but this is kind of the standard they used for enclosed spaces. You're not painting outside, so you wanna have something that's a little bit less harsh on the nose and the body, and so this, in terms of its chemical scent, is a lot less harsh than other things you're gonna find. I use a coil brush cleaner, so I take this stuff and I pour it into this container. When I rub my paintbrush over the tops of the coils, the paint comes out of my brush, it settles through the coils down to the bottom, so I can reuse this afterwards. This works for if you're doing, you know, a quick color change and you want to use the same brush, then you can just do that real quick. or at the end it helps to get out the majority of your paint before you go and wash your paintbrushes. Oil paintbrushes can't just be washed out with this. Take one of your rags that you have, squeeze the paint out of the paintbrush with the rag and get it as clean as you can. Then take it over to your brush cleaner and scrape it on the coils to get out all the paint that way. It should be pretty clean at this point, but to help keep your bristles soft and nice, then you're gonna have to go to the sink, and you can either use, they have different soaps you can order, or you can use just regular dish soap or shampoo, and you have to really get in there and scrub it out of your paintbrush. You scrub it into your hand until your water is running clean and there's no paint left in that, because oil paint is gonna ruin your brush really fast if you don't get it cleaned out super well. Well guys, I hope this was helpful to you in learning about the materials I use when I oil paint and ones that you can use as well. I'm going to be getting into tutorials on oil painting and doing some wave paintings with you guys in the very near future. Hopefully this gets you kind of primed with some ideas of what goes into the actual setup of oil painting. I hope you guys have a fantastic week, and I will see you next time. Goodbye!